I spin the wheel, see what it lands on, and I read that book. Please give me something good. It's not what I would have picked, but that's kind of the whole point of this experiment. Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. Today we are going to do another episode of TBR Wheel Controls My Reads for a Week. I had a lot of fun when we did this last time. Basically how it works is I have every single book on my physical TBR on this spinner wheel right here. I spin the wheel, see what it lands on, and I read that book. This was really fun the last time we did this because, I don't know, it just feels so fun sometimes to take the choice of what you're reading out of your own hands and just kind of leave it to random chance and see how your reading week just shapes up to be. It's just another fun way to kind of spice up your reading journey. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to add a little bit of a twist to this TBR wheel reading vlog challenge though. If the wheel does land on a book where I'm just like, I really don't want to read this right now, I have to make the executive decision to either just get over it and read that book or unhaul it. So we're adding some stakes to this. It's gonna be super fun. It's gonna be super exciting. Hopefully we get some good picks and hopefully I don't end up needing to actually unhaul anything, but let's just spin the wheel and see what our first read is going to be. Okay, she's spinning. What are we gonna get? Please give me something good. What is it gonna be? What is it? Buckeye. You know what? I feel like this is a great choice. This is Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. I have been staring at it on my cart for a little while now, but I've heard such good things about this. I've also just come off a week of reading some kind of confusing fantasy / sci-fi reads, so I feel like getting back to a real world and just grounding myself in real life human characters is just what I need right now. So this one, I believe it's set in a small town. This is honestly a book where I actually forget the premise every time I look at it. Like every time I read the premise, I get excited about it. I'm like, that sounds so good. But for some reason the next day, I'll completely forget what this book is about. I don't know what it is about the synopsis that just does not stick in my head, but this one is set in Ohio. We're in the aftermath of the Allied victory in Europe. We have Cal Jenkins, who is a man wounded not in war, but by his inability to serve it. We have Margaret Salt, a woman trying to obscure her past, and we have Cal's wife, Becky, who has a spiritual gift. She's a seer who can conjure the dead, helping families connect with those they've lost. Oh yeah, so I think there's something about an affair. I'm just gonna dive into it and see how it goes. But I am excited about this one because I've seen some really, really good reviews. And yeah, it's about time that I picked this one up. So thanks to the wheel, we're gonna start with Buckeye. Okay, I didn't have too much time to read last night because I was filming podcast and everything, but I did manage to read about 60 pages of Buckeye so far. And so for my initial thoughts, I do have some thoughts on kind of the writing style so far. It is a book that I think feels slow right off the bat, and I feel like that's going to be the case for the rest of this book. It just feels like one of those, yeah, kind of slow moving stories, but will span over a long period of time. And it does feel quite melancholy, but it is pleasant to read. Like I am actually really enjoying the writing style. It has beauty, but in a subtle way. And I think my favorite part about the writing so far is how I truly feel transported to this time. I feel like the attention to detail and just having the right amount of describing the environment, the atmosphere. I am getting a little bit of knowledge of what was like in the catalogs at the time. What could you shop for? How did you get your food? Things like that. And I feel like, yeah, that's making that experience of being transported back in time really rich feeling. And with a historical fiction, that's honestly the best you could hope for. I think also just the mentality, the attitude of all of the humans, all of the people living in this town during these hard times of war, I think is really interesting to read so far as well. Just how the wars truly affected not only them like physically and their day-to-day actions and their jobs and their money and whatever, but also how their minds work and where their priorities are and how they make their decisions and choices on how to act day to day through these little things. I feel like that just, yeah, it has the perfect amount of subtlety in this book, but feels impactful at the same time. I will say I was a little bit confused at the timeline at the very start of this book. We kind of start with this one moment in, I guess you could say, the first chapter of the book, and then we jump back 3 years. And I don't know, for some reason that gave me the impression that we would be jumping back and forth a lot, but we aren't really. Now we're kind of sticking to that 3 years ago sort of a timeline. And between the chapters, from what I've seen so far, I haven't really noticed clear indicators of what time, what year we're in, so I was kind of confused at that at first, and I was waiting to see if we would start jumping back and forth again, but we haven't. So I don't know why. That just caused me some great confusion at the very start of this book, but now that we've settled in, it's definitely not confusing at all. It so far is, yeah, just a very straightforward chronological timeline, which is great. I am excited to keep reading. There are some really strong themes that are already showing through the book. Things like how war can trigger racism from people or kind of bring those inner thoughts up to the forefront more. So a decently strong start so far. But yeah, gonna keep reading this today and we'll see how it goes. There is a quirk to this writing style that I've been trying to identify. I've been trying to wrap my head around what it actually is the entire time I've been reading this book, and I feel like I finally have a little bit of a hold on what's going on. So in this book, we essentially follow two couples as they meet each other, as they kind of live their lives, and then we're getting to this point in the book now where we're seeing them kind of come together and seeing their lives intertwine like with one another, the four of them. But the way we switch perspectives, I think, has been really interesting. We'll be living in one perspective for a while, and we'll be going on through this like series of events, this story through one person's perspective, and then right at the end, or near the end of, I guess, that sort of thought or event or sequence of events, we'll switch to another perspective and then finish that thought from another person's perspective. And I've been finding that so interesting because we live out this like entire journey from one character, and to finally just round out the point at the very end, that's when we switch to a different character. Like, we don't wait until after we've rounded out the point to switch, we do it as we're rounding out the point. And yeah, that's just been really interesting to read, and I do actually really like that writing style. I think Frederick Bachman does that a lot, especially in the Beartown series. There's just something so real feeling about it, and it feels like you are getting the bigger picture of what's going on with these characters and the relationship with one another when you see it this way. So that's actually really cool. I'm enjoying that about the writing. And I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of just slowly trucking through this one. I'm on page 178 now, so I'm just under halfway through. It's definitely not a fast-paced book. It's definitely very, very character-driven. We're really just establishing the relationships between our characters right now, like the initial relationships and what they've been through. And I feel like at this point in the book, maybe the plot will start to pick up. So yeah, it's a slow-moving book, but I am enjoying it because the writing is very, very good. I think it's just really interesting seeing how all of these different characters are kind of contributing to the war effort in their different ways. Some of them really, really want to help out with the war, but some of them are kind of, you know, they don't like war. They don't want it around. They want it to end. So even though some of them are against it, they're trying to find their own little ways to help either with the war effort directly or just kind of help the people around them get through it emotionally. The characters that we're following are definitely not perfect. They are frustrating in many ways, but I'm kind of attached to them. I don't know if I like all of them per se, but I do feel attached. So I don't know. I guess we'll just keep making our way through Buckeye slowly but surely. I just finished Buckeye. I think I'm gonna give this a 4-star. Definitely a really, really solid read. What I liked most about this actually was as we were following our characters, we saw pretty much all of them in different ways kind of choose these particular paths of life while kind of wanting something else, like while yearning, while aching for something else. And they weren't choosing their, I guess, like number one path on how they really truly wanted to live their lives in their heart because of certain societal pressures. And so we saw them as, yeah, they kind of went on with their lives, not really doing exactly what they wanted to do, but constantly thinking, oh, I'm going to choose this because it seems like the right thing to do, and I'll probably settle into it eventually, you know, like I'll probably end up falling in love with this certain life. But then because they all felt like they were missing something, they all pretty much acted out in certain different ways, but then when they acted out, then they were struggling with this internal battle of guilt versus, oh, but I kind of want to live my life that way. And they were all just having these, inner battles of like, oh, what if I chose to do that with my life instead? What if I chose to go for what I am passionate about or what I love or who I love instead of choosing this route? I think the character work in terms of those themes were done really well in this book. I think that's the part that really shone. And I also liked how this book handled grief in creative ways, but also realistic feeling ways that were beautiful but sad and ugly at the same time. It was just, very all-encompassing, very well done. What I was kind of missing from this book, I think, or not missing, but I think what broke my overall connection with this and resulted in this being only a 4-star and not a 5-star, which is still very good, was just the middle portion of this book. I feel like started getting a little bit too kind of bird's eye view, overview montagey. We had several parts in this book that kind of skimmed over the years. It was like, oh, and then 2 months later this happened, and then 4 months later this happened, and then a year later this happened, literally in those words. And I feel like those just time montagey moments broke my immersion and broke a little bit of my connection with the characters. So at the end of the book where, I don't know, we had some moments where I think probably would have made a lot of readers emotional, I just didn't feel as emotional as I think I would have if I felt 100% connected to those characters. But yeah, overall solid read. This actually, a lot of elements of this book reminded me of The Women by Kristen Hanna, because not only does it follow characters as they experience a war, but a lot of the focus is put on after the war and how there was so little care put into making sure the humans that encountered all of these traumas, experienced all these traumas, how they healed afterwards, both physically and mentally. And just there was not a lot of help and emphasis put into the aftercare, which I think is obviously really important. So yeah, reminded me of The Women in those ways. So I liked that side of the book as well. But yeah, solid 4-star read. I'm glad I read it. Thank you, TBR Wheel, for choosing this book for me. But let's go upstairs and let the wheel choose our next read. Okay. TBR cart behind us, we have a sleeping cat on the chair, and we have our spinner wheel. So let's pick our second read. What is the wheel gonna give us this time? Ooh, let's see what it picks. What is it? Tropesick. Okay. It's so funny. Every single time my wheel chooses something, my reaction is just like, okay, because it's not what I would have picked to read after Buckeye, but that's kind of the whole point of this experiment, is reading books that I would not naturally have gone to at the time. So, okay. I guess next read, we are switching moods entirely and we are going over to Tropesick by Lauren Okie. This is a contemporary romance read, and I've heard a lot about this author, but I've never actually read any one of her books. But this one follows 2 writers. I think they're both hired to ghost write a book together, but as they're writing the book, kind of going through the plot and everything, they start realizing that their lives are starting to mirror their actual story that they're writing, like the tropes that they're writing in the book are appearing in their own lives and their own kind of connection that they're starting with one another, their relationship that they're starting. So it's a book about tropes, and I'm actually really curious to see how this plays out, because I do feel like in a lot of romance books these days, a lot of our complaints, I mean, at least a lot of my complaints, is the feeling that romance and romantasy books are really relying too heavily on tropes these days. And so I'm curious to see how this book, that, you know, the whole premise of it, the whole idea of the story, the focus of it is tropes. I'm really curious to see how this feels, how it unfolds, how the tropes are handled, if they feel authentic and all of that. So yeah, this is gonna be our second read as chosen by the TBR wheel. Alright, 70 pages into Tropesick. It's definitely very easy reading so far, but there is kind of the potential to dive into some deeper emotions, which is always good for me in a romance book. So we do have both of our characters going on this kind of healing journey with grief and all of that. To give you a little more information on the characters, and I did check, this is not a spoiler, it is in the synopsis in the blurb of the book, but our main character, Katie, her brother actually passed away, I think it's 8 years ago, and Tyler, the main guy, was actually her brother's best friend growing up as children. And Katie and Tyler did have kind of hints at maybe something going on in their childhood. But yeah, the two of them are kind of linked through this grief, but they also have not spoken with each other in the past 8 years since Katie's brother's death. That was kind of this big catalyst that tore them apart, and there is a little bit of mystery on what exactly happened with them after her brother died. But I do tend to like romances that have an element of grief in them. I think I just like seeing characters lift each other up. You know, I like seeing characters help each other through these processes and really support each other in that way. So yeah, this story definitely at the moment has potential to be a good one for me. And so I have high hopes on the direction that this book will go. What I will say is, although the writing I feel like is quite easy to read, it's pretty simple, nothing too complicated, there was one thing that was happening, I think only maybe just in the first 2 or 3 chapters, where it felt like the chapters were ending kind of mid-thought. It felt like we just needed 1 or 2 more sentences in each chapter to round out that moment or that thought that we were in the middle of before jumping into the next chapter. I don't know, there was this feeling where I was just like, this feels incomplete. It feels like we've cut in the middle of a scene, and maybe that was a stylistic thing by choice, but it didn't really flow very well for me and my brain. I do think though, as the book has gone on, we've definitely smoothed that out and the thoughts are coming round circle. The thing that's funny though to me is that I was noticing that in the first couple of chapters, and then because in the story we do have this big part of the plot of our 2 characters writing a book together, they're obviously going to discuss certain literary things, like certain writing techniques. There was actually a moment where one of our characters critiqued the other's writing and was like, wait, you don't need to repeat this thought again because your writing was so good. It was good enough that you don't have to just say it again at the end. You have shown what you wanted to show. You don't have to tell it again after the fact, or else it does feel like just a little bit of repetition. And it was funny to me in that moment because for me, I was like, wait, but in the first couple chapters of this book, I needed to be told a little bit more. I wasn't shown enough, and I needed that final, like, you know, sentence to wrap it all around and conclude the end of this part of the book before diving into the next. So it was just funny that this book does feel quite self-aware of what makes a good romance book, how to really round it out, but then the first 2 chapters were really missing that. But yeah, all that to say, it has really smoothed out as it's gone on. It was only really a problem for the first 2 or 3 chapters. Funny observation, I'm gonna keep reading this. I think so far it's pretty good for me. You know what? I am actually quite enjoying this overall. I like the progression of most of the things that are happening. I like our emotional journey with our characters the best, I think. I feel like their bond with one another feels realistic in the way that, yeah, like they did grow up together. They do have this familiarity with one another. So when they kind of reunited in this timeline, they fell into this really comfortable rhythm with each other very, very quickly and easily. And I think that made sense, but it's not like everything was all perfect and good right away. It's like, yeah, they found this familiarity with one another, but there was still so much emotional journey to go. There's still so much more opening up to one another to go and kind of hashing out things that happened. So yeah, I really like the emotional journey. I also like that this book is really, really leaning into the concept of it and really embracing it. We have 3 kind of timelines, I guess, that are mirroring each other in their pacing, which I'm finding really fun to read. Like we have our present day timeline, obviously, and we have some flashbacks to our past timeline, and then we have the fictional timeline, the timeline of the actual story that the 2 of them are writing together, and all of the timelines are fitting with one another very well in the way that we're jumping back and forth. So I think that's being done quite well. The only thing right now that I am not completely loving, and I think this is just something that I maybe am realizing I have against most romance books in general, but while I like the emotional progression and that journey with our characters, I feel like the physical is kind of being dragged out for too long on a technicality. And I'm gonna explain. I've seen this being done with a lot of romance books, so it's not just this one. And maybe I feel this way because I don't look for books because of spice. Like I don't look for spice moments in books. If they happen, it's fine, whatever, but I don't seek them out specifically in a romance book, where I feel like some romance readers really do seek out a good spice, like build up tension, release, whatever. But in this story, I feel like there is just, it has that dynamic where it's like, okay, we can kiss, we can touch each other in like all of these different ways. Like whatever way you want me to touch you, I can do that. But like the last final step of full insertion, let's say, we can't do that because of this, and that. And I do feel like that is being dragged on for a little bit too long in the story, because maybe that's just not something I care for. For me, if a couple in a story, if they kiss, if they touch each other in certain ways, for me the tension's already been released in terms of the fiction that I read. And so just kind of this waiting for this technicality of like, oh, when can we have each other fully physically, just like there are no stakes in it for me in terms of when I'm reading books. And I do think that some of the emphasis that's put into that in the story is just slightly frustrating me a little bit. I'm just like, I don't really care for this side of the story. But I do, yeah, like everything else that is going on emotionally with our characters. But I think I have just over 100 pages left to go. So let's see what our third act conflict is looking like, because as a book that seems so self-aware, like hyper aware of what it's doing, hyper aware of what romance books are supposed to do, I'm wondering what the third act conflict in this is going to be like, because that can really, really make or break a romance book for many, many readers, including myself. I definitely am a reader who does get very, very picky with third act conflicts and generally hate them and just wish they didn't exist. So let's see what Lauren Okie does in this one. Okay. The ending of this book? What was that? What was that? I'm a little bit angry at the ending of this book, because I do think throughout the book, I had my like little complaints throughout, but overall I was enjoying the writing style as a whole, and I was liking the journey we were on. I honestly think Tyler as the love interest, for one, I was rooting for him the entire way through the book. He did do things that were quite frustrating through the book, but I was expecting it to have a very good payoff, you know, when the big reveal of the reasons that he did the things that he did throughout this story. I thought those reasons were going to be so good, and I was frustrated at him, but in a good way, where I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to know what he was all about. And I do feel like the payoff just wasn't as strong as I would have hoped. I would have hoped the reasoning would have been better, more solid. I just think the foundations of everything were just not as stable and solid as I would have hoped by the end. So yeah, I was like a good frustrated throughout the entire book, and I was waiting, you know, that buildup of frustration and tension for like, okay, why did all of this happen? I can see it, but I didn't fully feel it. And then we come to the plot twist at the end of this book. And without giving away too much and spoilers and everything, of course, I do just feel like the plot twist was way too overcomplicated, and I feel like the plot twist changed the genre of this entire book. And I do get angry when that happens, because when you've read like 80% of a book and you know the genre and you've settled in and you know you have a vibe of what the book is going to be, and then it just switches up on you at the very end, I do get very frustrated at that. I do think this sort of a plot twist could have worked though. Like, I'm not accepting it in the context of this book, but I do think kind of a bizarre, absurd twist like this could have worked if we laid down more groundwork throughout the rest of the book. It just felt so out of the blue. And honestly, I do think Lauren Okie as the author, or maybe her editors or something, I feel like they knew the plot twist was kind of absurd and a bit of a far stretch as well, because even at the end of the book, we had our characters in the text justifying the plot twist, kind of being like, oh, but like there were breadcrumbs pointing to the fact that this happened because of this and this and this. And to me, I just think if you feel the need at the end of your book to specify the breadcrumbs that you left along the way to justify your own plot twist, then the breadcrumbs weren't strong enough. I feel like breadcrumbs should be, you know, they should be clear enough to be able to be picked up on by the readers, you know? It should be something like not so obvious that you guess the entire plot twist, but obvious enough that you're like, yeah, I was thinking that was weird and that was weird and that was weird. But the fact that they had to justify the breadcrumbs and like restate them again at the end of the book just to be like, no, we got you, but it's because of these, but like trying to disguise it through the characters thinking about the plot twist, and that I'm kind of really mad at the plot twist. I was really ready to give this book like a 4-star rating. I did really like the writing style. It reminded me a lot of a Carabas Stone or an Emily Henry, kind of that type of an emotion-filled, trauma-filled romance. I think the trauma versus healing versus banter and romance honestly had a pretty good balance throughout the book. And yeah, I was enjoying it, even though I had a few little frustrations. But I do think because of that plot twist at the end, I'm gonna have to lower my rating to a 3.5, I would say. So it's not like a horrendous book by any means. I just think that plot twist didn't have to be there. And we probably could have told this entire story and concluded it without having that twist in there. So anyways, that was Tropesick. What a ride. I am curious though, like I do feel drawn to read more Lauren Okie because I overall liked her writing style, and I have heard really great things about her debut novel. Can't remember what it's called right now, but she has a debut novel that I think is just, the title's a combination of just very regular words. You know those types of titles that just feel like it's just a sentence or something, and they're so hard to remember. But curious about her writing, curious about reading her other books as an author, but I don't know if this one fully worked for me, but it had potential. Anyways, shall we spin the wheel again to see the third book we're gonna read this week? Okay, my camera battery is low, so let's try and spin this wheel super quick, but we have our wheel loaded back up. Let's see what we get for our third read. Shall we switch genres completely again? Oh, okay. I'm actually so excited about this one. So we got Daughters of Shandong as our third pick. This is a historical fiction. Actually, let me go just grab it. Okay, Daughters of Shandong by Eve J. Chung. I'm so excited to read this one. It is, yeah, historical fiction, so we're going back to that genre, but this is the same author that wrote The Young Will Remember, which is a book that I read 2 months ago, and I really, really, really loved it. Daughters of Shandong was actually her debut novel, so she wrote this one before The Young Will Remember, and I've heard wonderful things about this. But yeah, I'm excited because I already do know I love Eve J. Chung writing. I love the way she tells a story, but yeah, I guess we're gonna just read a lot of historical fiction this week, and by a lot I mean 2 historical fictions. My camera is gonna die very, very soon though, so I'm just gonna get started on reading this, and then we'll do the full plot synopsis and early thoughts once I get a little bit into this one. But I'm so excited about this read. Thank you, wheel. Does anyone read historical fiction and sometimes just think, maybe I'm not strong enough for this? Is it just me? Or do you guys feel that way too? Because I read so many stories about characters that face so many different traumas, but when it's fiction, it's definitely easier to stomach. But when it's historical fiction, it just feels that much more horrific, and it affects me just that much more because you know that these events are inspired by true stories and real humans did have to face the things that these characters are facing. It does say on the back of this book, this is inspired by a true story. So I'd actually be really curious to see how close to, you know, a person's real journey, like a specific person's real journey this was. And usually I feel like with historical fiction that does get mentioned, acknowledged in the acknowledgements or in an author's note in the book. So yeah, I'd be curious to see if at the end of this book, there is an author's note that specifies what parts of the story are real, what parts were, you know, where creative liberties were taken. But don't let the beautiful writing fool you. There are some really, really horrific things happening in here. But I do think historical fiction is so important to read for that reason, to remind us of things that happened in the past and to just, you know, like, let's not make those same mistakes again. But I did promise you a plot synopsis. So in this story, we follow the women in the Ang family. And the Ang family, they are quite wealthy. They're quite known. They're basically top of the hierarchy in their rural area that they live in called Shandong. And in this family, we follow a mother and 4 daughters. The thing is though, this mother, because she has 4 daughters, she's not really seen as someone who is contributing to the family because she hasn't provided an heir. She hasn't had a son. She's had 4 daughters. These daughters are seen, unfortunately, as a waste of space, a waste of resources. And so in their own household even, they are treated so poorly. They're abused, they're neglected, and they're just waiting for her to pop out a boy. So while they are a very, very wealthy family and have the means to do so much and live comfortable lives, our mother and daughters that we're following, they aren't living very comfortably at all. Now, this story is set in 1948, so we're in the midst of the Civil War in China. And so as the communists are closing in on Shandong, most of the Ang family flees to safety, but they actually leave the mother and the daughters behind because, again, they think of them as a waste of space, a waste of resources. They're like, you guys just stay here, take care of the house, whatever, face whatever you have to face. We're gonna get to safety. We're gonna leave you behind. So we follow our characters as they, just face these really, really tough times and embark on a journey to try and stay safe, embark on a journey to safety, but also try and come to terms with this family that has literally left them behind. And so far the story is told through the perspective of the eldest daughter. I just can't fathom how humans can treat other humans in these terrible, terrible ways, treating the other side as, like they see humans as animals now. You know what I mean? Like they don't even see people on the other side of a war as people. They literally treat them like they are an inferior species, and that is just so wild to me that people can get brainwashed so deeply into thinking that way, because it's just really shocking to see how people can not only, cause so much brutality, violence, and everything, but literally feel joy from it, literally get inspired by it. It's not like they're doing all of these violent acts, but just doing them because they feel like they need to, like they've been ordered to, but they're not getting joy from it. They're actually getting enjoyment from these things. And that's what I think is the most deeply disturbing thing of it all. I also think, like, even within the Ang family themselves, there is like a grandmother character, and the grandmother herself is part of the system that is treating the mother and the daughters that we're following so terribly, because she's expecting the mother to have a son and she's disappointed in the mother for not having a son. So she's a part of the abuse as well. And it's just wild to me to think that women at the time who knew how other women were treated and maybe went through iterations of that themselves can kind of turn it around on other women and be like, oh, but you're not providing an heir, so now I'm gonna turn everything around to you, but like I'm also a woman and could have been in the same situation as you. I don't know. There's a lot happening here. I am very, very, very attached to our characters though, and I am very invested in their well-being, and I want them to be safe. I want them to be comfortable. I just want them to like live and be happy. So that's my current state while reading this book right now. It is causing all kinds of emotional turmoil. There is, though, it's not all bleak and terrible. There is this lovely, lovely theme of, like when you spread kindness, when you share kindness, it will come around again. Like the people that you've been kind to, the strangers that you've been kind to in the past, even when you do these kind acts not expecting anything in return, those things might come around again when the time comes, when you're facing hard times. That kindness can come back around in moments. So there are, these little beautiful touching moments within the story, but mixed in with a lot of horrific things. Anyways, I'm 130 pages into this book. I am gonna keep reading it today, but so far this is incredible. This was so good. This was so good. I think we have another 5-star on our hands. Eve J. Chung strikes once again. Oh my goodness, she is such a talented author. Like literally historical fiction at its best. So good. I think I love in her books, in this one and in The Young Will Remember, there's this really big focus on identity and figuring out like what your identity is. In The Young Will Remember, there was definitely a big theme of our main character being kind of ambiguous in certain times with her identity. Like in some moments she could identify with being American, in some moments she could identify with being Chinese, but then she also spoke Japanese. And it was just kind of this sense of shifting and adapting your identity based on where you are in your situation. And we had kind of a similar theme with this, but in a little bit of a different way. We also had a focus here on like your family too. Do you identify with your family even after they've left you, like abandoned you? Do you still hold on to that hope? Is that sense of you like sticking to your family and that priority being so deeply ingrained into the culture, does that stick with you? And do you still feel loyal? And yeah, do you just identify with your family after they've left you and have treated you so poorly? And then seeing the internal struggle of, do you identify from where you came from, or do you identify from where you are now or where you're going to next? And then also just going back to the fact that, you know, sons and daughters were treated so differently, and seeing our characters shift their perspective based on the things they faced. There's definitely a lot of growth in that way too. And then on top of all that, we also had this idea of breaking cycles through generations, which is also something that I always love reading about. And I feel like it was done well here, where we saw examples of things that you can grow into quickly, things that you might be forced to grow into quickly, versus things that might take literally generations to fully kind of shift your entire viewpoint and perspective on certain things. So yeah, this was so good, like such an incredible story. I felt so connected to all of these characters, and in the background of everything, obviously some very strong themes that we've discussed. I also did read the author's note at the end of this book, and it did feel like quite personal to me, because obviously I come from a Chinese background. No, I was not alive in 1948, but I do know kind of these little bits of my own family history, and a lot of what our characters went through here are experiences that, you know, the past generations of my family went through, with kind of this journey of fleeing from China to Hong Kong to Taiwan, etc. And what was really interesting in the author's note to me is that Eve J. Chung mentioned that she obviously has family that went through this period of time, and so that's what inspired her to write the story in the first place. But when she started asking her relatives about their experiences and trying to get kind of more personal accounts of what happened for her research for this book, none of her relatives really wanted to speak on it and give her detail of what happened. They were all just kind of like, yeah, it was a dark time, I don't really want to talk about it. And that is also something that I can relate to, because I know my parents have told me kind of these vague stories of what my like great grandparents went through during this time, but it's all kind of this haze. It's all like, none of it is in detail. I think it's something that my family as well just kind of wanted to shut down, leave in the past, and be like, yeah, that sucked, we're moving on with life. And so I just found that really interesting in the author's note that Eve J. Chung encountered that as well, and then just had to work that much harder to find information and research for this historical fiction. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting to read about her experience. And honestly, this is now making me want to pry into my family history even more, like ask my parents again, ask my relatives again, give me more information. I want to know exactly, not exactly, but like I want to know more specifics of the things that my family faced during this time. But yeah, 5-star read. This was so good, and thank you TBR Wheel for granting me a 5-star read this week. But yeah, I guess all that to say, that brings us to the end of this reading vlog. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what other kind of randomly picked TBR reading vlogs you would like to see. I do like this TBR wheel. I will continue to do it in the future, but if there are any other fun ways that you would like to see me pick my reads for a week, let me know in the comments. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!